My name is Amina, and I am 32 years old, and everything you think you know about privilege is a lie when it is built on fear. I was born into a Saudi royal household where marble floors echoed louder than laughter and where honor was valued more than breath itself. From the outside, my life looked untouchable, protected, blessed by God and bloodline. But inside those walls, I learned very early that love was conditional and safety depended on obedience. Islam was not a religion I chose. It was the air I was forced to breathe, the language of fear that shaped my childhood before I ever learned the language of my own heart. I was taught how to pray before I was taught how to feel, how to lower my eyes before I learned how to ask questions, how to obey before I learned how to understand. Fear was my first theology. Every morning began with reminders of duty, and every evening ended with warnings about shame. I memorized Quranic verses without context, without permission to wrestle with meaning, and I was praised not for understanding God, but for never questioning Him. When I asked why Allah felt distant, I was told distance was my fault. When I cried during prayer, I was told tears were proof of weak faith. When silence followed my supplications, I was told endurance was worship. So I endured. I prayed 5 times a day with a heart that felt increasingly hollow, bowing my body while my soul quietly starved. Behind the veils and etiquette, behind the servants and guarded halls, I was profoundly alone. No one ever asked what I believed, only whether I complied. And I learned quickly that a woman's worth in my world was measured by her silence, and that curiosity was treated as rebellion. By my teenage years, I had already learned how to disappear emotionally, how to smile on command, how to nod when elders spoke of my future marriage, as if my life were already signed away. I carried privilege like a heavy robe I could never remove, beautiful to others, but suffocating to wear. At night, when the palace slept, my thoughts grew loud. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers into darkness, asking Allah to let me feel Him just once, to let me know He saw me, not just my obedience. But heaven remained silent, and that silence terrified me more than punishment ever could. I had seen what happened to women who asked the wrong questions. Names erased, faces removed from photographs, stories rewritten until silence replaced memory. So I buried my doubts deep inside me and layered them with discipline and routine, telling myself faith meant not needing answers. Still, something inside me was restless, aching for a God who loved rather than monitored, who spoke rather than demanded. I didn't know then that hunger itself was a warning, or maybe an invitation. I didn't know that fear was not holiness, and silence was not peace. I only knew that the faith I was given no longer comforted me, and admitting that even to myself felt like treason. If you're listening to me right now, especially in secret, maybe with your volume low and your heart racing, I want you to know I understand that fear. If testimonies like mine help you feel less alone, I gently ask you to support this channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing, because these stories travel where voices like mine cannot go openly. Faith is easy when it protects you, but what happens when faith begins to suffocate you instead? That question followed me into the darkest night of my life, and it was the moment everything I believed began to fracture. The night my faith fractured did not begin with anger, but with confusion. I was sitting behind a carved wooden screen during a family gathering when I heard shouting from the courtyard below, a woman's voice pleading, then silence that felt deliberate. No one explained anything. No one had to. I already knew the rules. She had been accused of dishonor, of bringing shame by refusing a marriage arranged to protect alliances. The men spoke calmly, using God's name like punctuation, saying justice had been served, saying Allah is righteous, saying obedience preserves order. I felt my stomach twist because I had heard those same words my entire life. That night, I could not pray. I laid my forehead on the prayer mat and nothing came. No verses, no comfort, My
only a
name
heavy
is
question
Amina,
pressing into my chest.
and I am 32
If
years
Allah
old.
is merciful,
And
why did
everything
mercy
you
sound
think
like
you know
cruelty?
about privilege is a
Memories
lie
flooded
when
me.
it is built on
Flashbacks
fear.
of my childhood Quran lessons, where teachers
I
warned
was
us
born
that doubt
into a
was a whisper
Saudi
from
royal
Shaitan,
household
and that hell was
where
closer than
marble
love.
floors echoed
I remembered
louder
being
than
told that
laughter,
fear was healthy,
and where
that
honor
terror kept
was
faith
valued
pure.
more than breath
But looking back on
itself.
that courtyard, I felt something inside
From
me
the
crack.
outside, my
I
life
whispered
looked
into the dark,
untouchable,
asking God if he saw that woman
protected,
as more than an
blessed
example.
by God and bloodline.
The silence answered again.
But inside
Over the
those
following days,
walls,
my
I
prayers felt
learned
mechanical,
very early
my words empty.
that love was conditional.
I began noticing things
and
I had trained myself
safety
to ignore,
depended on obedience.
verses that spoke of punishment more than compassion,
Islam
sermons
was
that
not
justified
a
violence
religion
while
I
claiming
chose.
holiness.
It was the
I
air
told
I
myself
was
this was
forced
weakness,
to breathe,
that I needed more
the
discipline, more
language
fasting,
of fear
more
that
obedience.
shaped my childhood.
But the harder I tried, the more distant God felt. I was terrified of my own thoughts. In my world, safety meant silence and truth was dangerous. I stood between them, shaking. One evening, I overheard an imam explaining that mercy belongs only to those who submit correctly. Something in me rebelled, quietly, internally, for the first time. I thought of that woman's voice and wondered who decides what correct submission looks like. That question scared me more than hell. I stopped sleeping. I started pretending better. I smiled wider, bowed deeper, recited louder. Inside, I was unraveling. One night, with my door locked and my phone hidden beneath my pillow, I typed forbidden words into the search bar, questions I had never allowed myself to form. Why does Islam punish doubt? Why does God need fear? Who is Jesus really? My hands were shaking as I read testimonies, stories of people who asked the same questions and lost everything. I should have stopped. I knew the risk. But something stronger than fear pushed me forward. For the first time, I admitted the truth to myself. If God is just, why does my soul feel condemned? The screen glowed in the darkness as I realized there was no turning back. I closed the browser repeatedly, yet reopened it, caught between terror and relief, feeling as though I was standing on the edge of a cliff built by generations before me. Every warning I had ever been given echoed in my head, verses about apostasy, stories of punishment whispered like bedtime tales. My heart raced whenever footsteps passed my door, convinced my thoughts were somehow visible. I tried to drown the questions with worship, but the rituals felt hollow, like rehearsing lines in a language that no longer reached heaven. I began comparing what I read with what I had been taught, noticing contradictions I was never allowed to see. Justice without compassion felt incomplete. Obedience without love felt abusive. I wondered if God required fear because love had been replaced. Each realization felt like betrayal, not of religion, but of my family, my blood, my history. I hated myself for doubting, yet I could not unknow what I had seen. One night, I stared at my reflection, veil perfectly placed, and eyes empty, and I whispered that I was tired of pretending. The words frightened me. I deleted my search history and hid my phone, but the fracture had already spread. Faith that survives only through fear was no longer faith to me, and in that realization, I crossed an invisible line I could never step back over. From that night forward, every call to prayer sounded different, not like an invitation, but like a reminder of the cost of honesty. I became hyper-aware of eyes, of whispers, of the weight of tradition pressing against my chest. I knew I was still physically safe, but spiritually I was adrift, floating between what I was taught and what my conscience began to demand. I did not yet know where the questions would lead me, only that returning to ignorance was impossible. Something had awakened, fragile but alive, and fear could no longer fully silence it. The fracture was complete, and though I did not understand it yet, my life was already moving toward a confrontation I could not escape. I carried that night inside me like a secret wound,
invisible to everyone else, shaping every breath I took and every choice that followed. It was the beginning of loss, and also the beginning of truth. I did not know then how high the cost would be, but I had already chosen to see. And seeing would change everything forever, even if it destroyed me. I sensed that deeply, inside me.
My name
I
is
did not
Amina,
go looking for Jesus,
and I am
and that truth
32
matters,
years old.
because nothing in my upbringing
And
prepared
everything
me
you
to
think
desire
you
him.
know about privilege
I
is
went
a
to
lie
sleep one night,
when
exhausted
it is
from
built
fear,
on fear.
my heart pounding from thoughts I was not supposed
I
to
was
have.
born into a
And I remember
Saudi
whispering
royal
into the dark that I
household
just wanted
where
truth,
marble
whatever it
floors
was,
echoed
even if it
louder
scared me.
than laughter,
Sleep took
and
me
where
suddenly,
honor was
and I found myself
valued more
standing in
than
a place
breath
that did not feel
itself.
like a dream. There was light,
From the
not blinding,
outside,
not
my
harsh,
life looked
but alive,
untouchable,
as if it breathed.
protected,
In front of me stood a
blessed
man
by
dressed in
God
white,
and bloodline.
not distant, not
But
towering,
inside
but
those
close enough
walls,
that I felt
I
seen
learned
rather than
very
inspected.
early that
He
love
looked at me
was
in a way no one ever
conditional,
had,
and
not with
safety
authority that
depended on
demanded submission,
obedience.
but with knowing that invited rest.
Islam was not
He
a
spoke my
religion
name,
I chose.
Amina.
It
He
was
did
the
not shout
air
it,
I
he
was
did not
forced
command
to
it.
breathe.
He said it like
The
someone who had
language
always
of
known me.
fear that shaped
My
my
knees gave way,
childhood.
and I fell, not in fear, but in relief so strong it hurt. I remember saying I was not worthy, that I had doubted, that I was afraid, and he smiled, not amused, but gentle, and said I was tired and that he knew. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, my sheets damp with sweat, my room silent except for my own breathing. Panic followed immediately. I had been warned my entire life about dreams like this. Shaitan deceives, Shaitan mimics. I sat upright, repeating Quranic verses under my breath, trying to erase the image burned into my mind. But the peace lingered. It would not leave. For the first time in my life, I wanted to sleep again. Days passed and the image stayed vivid, not fading like imagination should. I tried to return to routine, to drown the memory with prayer and discipline, but everything felt disrupted, as if a door had been opened inside me that refused to close. One evening, as I stood by the window, the call to prayer echoing outside, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, expecting no one, but the air felt heavy with warmth. I did not see him with my eyes, but I knew he was there, the same peace wrapping around my fear. My heart whispered his name before my mind could stop it. Jesus. The word tasted forbidden and sweet at the same time. I fell to my knees shaking, convinced this was madness, that I was losing my mind. Yet I felt more sane in that moment than I ever had before. That night, I downloaded a Bible app with trembling fingers, deleting it twice before finally opening it. The first words I read were simple, but they pierced me. Come to me all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Rest was not something my faith had ever promised me. Fear, yes. Duty, yes. Rest, never. I read late into the night, hiding the phone under my blanket, and reading about a God who touched the unclean, who defended women, who forgave rather than threatened. Every sentence felt dangerous and healing at once. I whispered a prayer I had never been taught, my voice barely audible, asking Jesus if he was real, if he truly saw me, if the peace I felt was from him. As the words left my mouth, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside my door. My blood turned cold. I locked my phone instantly, hiding it beneath my pillow, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard. The handle rattled. A voice called my name. I answered calmly, forcing my voice steady, while inside I was unraveling. The steps moved away. I sat frozen long after, realizing how fragile my new secret was. That night, I understood something terrifying and beautiful. If Jesus was real, then everything I had been taught about God was incomplete. And if I continued, there would be consequences. But as I lay back down, fear pressed against me from one side,
peace from the other. For the first time, peace was stronger. I closed my eyes and whispered his name again, not as a test, but as a plea. And I slept, truly slept, knowing that whatever awaited me, I had encountered something, someone who did not demand my fear to love me. And that realization was already changing me in ways I could not undo. The change in me was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to anyone who watched me from a distance. I smiled less politely, lingered on questions instead of answers, and sometimes stayed silent when I should have nodded. But those closest to me noticed, and suspicion began to grow like a shadow. One evening, an imam came to the palace, summoned in haste after whispered rumors reached ears that could not tolerate doubt.
And everything
He spoke
you
in
think
calm,
you know
measured
about
tones,
privilege
but every
is a
word
lie
carried the weight
when
of
it
judgment.
is built on fear.
Amina, he said, we hear unsettling
I was
things.
born into
You
a
are straying
Saudi
from the
royal
path.
household
You must
where
confess your heart
marble
before it is too
floors
late.
echoed louder
I
than
felt the room
laughter,
tighten, the walls
and where
pressing against
honor
me.
was valued
My
more
relatives
than
exchanged
breath
looks that did
itself.
not need translation. Shame,
From
fear,
the outside,
anticipation.
my life looked
They expected
untouchable,
obedience. I felt my pulse
protected,
rise, my chest
blessed
tight.
by God
I wanted
and
to vanish,
bloodline.
to melt into the marble
But
floors.
inside
But the
those
part of me that
walls,
had woken
I
in secret
learned
that night
very
would not
early
allow it.
that love
I realized
was
in that moment
conditional
that truth was
and
treason,
safety
yet
depended
silence
on
was betrayal to
obedience.
myself. I spoke,
Islam
voice
was
quivering
not
but
a
clear,
religion I chose,
and admitted the first truth I
it
had
was
dared
the
not name
air I
aloud.
was forced to breathe.
I believe in Jesus.
The language of
The air
fear
froze,
that shaped my
eyes widened.
childhood.
Some gasped, others lowered their heads as if the floor could swallow them whole. My uncle, whose word carried centuries of authority, stepped forward. You have committed apostasy, he said. Do you understand what that means? I did. I felt fear like a living thing crawling up my spine, but I also felt something new. Resolve. My heart repeated the name I'd learned to whisper in secret. Jesus. He who had spoken peace into my dreams was with me now, invisible but real. They called for witnesses. I was questioned, pressured, tempted to recant with promises of restored honor, of safety, of return to family and kingdom. Every argument was precise, rehearsed, meant to break me. They reminded me of my bloodline, my duty, my privilege. They whispered about shame, about the ruin I would bring. I felt the old fear gnawing at me, clawing for obedience, but my secret prayers had grown roots, unseen but strong. I thought of the woman whose voice I had heard the night my faith began to fracture, of the Bible passages that told me the weary could find rest. I realized that for the first time I understood the cost of truth. I could not lie without breaking myself completely. So I chose Jesus. I chose him quietly, yet the declaration thundered in that silent room. The imam's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger masked by ritual authority. Relatives exchanged subtle signals. I knew my life would never be the same. My confession did not produce relief. It did not produce understanding. It produced silence so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. I closed my eyes and prayed again, whispering the name that had become my refuge. Jesus. The first time I'd spoken it aloud in the presence of others, I had felt both the terror of exposure and the warmth of belonging to a power far greater than fear. The verdict was unspoken, yet understood. I felt their eyes as if they could see my soul, and in that gaze I felt both condemnation and fascination. My hands trembled, my body shook, but my heart was steadier than it had ever been. The moment was electric, balanced between life and death, between obedience and truth. I could not predict what would come next, only that I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. And in that terrifying moment, as whispers filled the room, as gazes weighed on me like stones, I felt a quiet certainty that Jesus had already carried me through the worst of it. Fear pressed close, but peace pressed closer. I would soon discover how close. They did not announce my sentence publicly because my bloodline made secrecy preferable to spectacle, but secrecy did not make it merciful. I was taken before dawn, wrapped not in dignity but in restraint, my wrists bound so tightly I could feel my pulse fighting the rope. The corridors felt colder than ever before, stripped of familiarity, every step echoing with finality. Faces I had known since childhood avoided my eyes, and those who did look at me did so as if I were already dead. I was no longer Amina, the daughter, the niece, the future bride. I was Amina the warning. The accusation was spoken formally: apostasy, betrayal of faith, corruption of honor. Each word landed like a blow. I searched the faces around me for mercy and found none, only fear of association. In that moment, I understood that love in my world had always been conditional, and now the condition had failed. They spoke prayers over me that sounded hollow, words meant to cleanse the community of my existence.
My name is Amina.
I wanted to scream that I loved them,
32 years
that I never
old,
meant to bring shame,
and everything
but the
you
words
think
stayed
you know
locked
about
inside me.
privilege is a
My
lie.
voice no
when
longer
it is
belonged to
built
me.
on fear.
I was led outside as the sun began to
I
rise.
was born
The
into
sky
a
painted
Saudi
with colours
royal
that felt
household
cruelly beautiful.
where marble
The air was
floors
dry,
echoed
the ground
louder than
uneven beneath my
laughter,
feet.
and where
I remember
honor
thinking
was
how strange it
valued
was
more
that the
than
world
breath
continued so
itself.
calmly. Birds still flew.
From the outside,
still
my
moved.
life looked untouchable.
Life did not pause for my death.
Protected,
Hands forced me to my knees.
blessed by God and
Someone
bloodline.
recited verses loudly, as if
But
volume could
inside
drown out
those
doubt.
walls, I
I felt
learned
terror
very
like I'd never
early
known before,
that
sharp and
love
absolute,
was
my
conditional,
body screaming
and
to survive.
safety depended on
In
obedience.
that chaos, a single thought cut through the noise, clearer
Islam
than
was
fear.
not a religion I chose.
Jesus.
It was the
I whispered
air
his
I
name
was
with cracked
forced
lips,
to breathe.
unsure if heaven would hear me
The
in that place.
language of fear
I remembered
that
his
shaped
voice in my dream,
childhood.
calm and near, and I clung to that memory as if it was solid ground. Stones were gathered. I heard them hit the dirt, dull and heavy. My breathing became shallow, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I thought of my childhood, of laughter that once felt safe, of prayers I had offered with sincerity, and I felt grief wash over me, not for my life, but for the truth that had cost it. The first stone struck my shoulder, pain exploding through me. Another hit my side. The world narrowed to sensation and sound, to shouts and prayers blending into a single roar. I cried out, not in denial, but in surrender, asking Jesus to receive me, to forgive those who did not know what they were doing. I felt anger try to rise and then dissolve into something softer, something that felt like release. Darkness crept into the edges of my vision, my body growing numb even as pain continued. I remember collapsing fully, my face pressed into dust, the taste of blood and earth mingling. In those final moments of awareness, I felt an unexpected calm, as if arms surrounded me, shielding me from the worst of it. I thought I was dying, and I was not afraid. My last conscious thought was not of fear or regret, but of gratitude that I had not denied the truth I had found. Sound faded. Light disappeared. I expected nothingness. Instead, I felt held. Silence followed, deeper than any I had known, and then everything went dark. Death was not the end I had imagined. Not an empty fall into nothingness, not a scream swallowed by darkness. Instead, it felt like crossing a threshold, like stepping out of a locked room into open air. There was no pain anymore, no weight, no fear. I was aware without a body, awake without eyes, present without struggle. Then there was light, not blinding, not sharp, but warm and intentional, wrapping around me with familiarity that made me weep without tears. I knew him before I saw him. Jesus stood before me, the same presence from my dream, but now more real than anything I had ever known. His eyes held depth beyond time, and when he spoke, His voice did not echo, it settled. He told me my story was not finished, that what had been done to me did not have the final word. I tried to speak, to ask why, to ask how, but understanding came without language. I felt love without condition, authority without cruelty, power without fear. I wanted to stay. I wanted to disappear into that peace forever. But he touched me, and the touch carried both tenderness and command. I felt myself pulled backward, as if the light receded and gravity returned. Pain rushed in violently. My chest convulsed. Air burned my lungs. I screamed, a raw animal sound tearing through my throat as my body jolted awake. I opened my eyes to chaos. Faces pale with terror hovered above me. Someone shouted, someone fell back. I tasted blood and dust and felt my body shaking uncontrollably. I was alive. I had been pronounced dead. I knew it. They knew it. Fear rippled through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Some screamed that it was sorcery. Others backed away as if I were cursed. I heard prayers turn frantic, desperate. And hands that had thrown stones now trembled. I tried to sit up and pain flared, but beneath it there was strength, a certainty that held me upright. I was breathing. I was conscious. I was alive. Someone ran. Someone shouted orders.
My name is Amina.
The atmosphere shifted from righteous confidence to panic.
And
Authority does not know what to do
you know
when death
about
refuses to
privilege
obey
is
it.
a lie when it
I
is
caught
built
fragments
on
of words,
fear.
miracle, deception, danger.
I was born
I felt
into
hands
a
grab
Saudi
me, not
royal
gently,
household,
pulling me away
where
from the ground as
marble
if afraid to
floors
touch me for
echoed
too long.
louder than laughter.
My head spun.
And where
My body
honor
felt
was
broken,
valued
yet
more
present.
than breath itself.
As they dragged me, I looked up at the sky, bright
From the
and endless,
outside, my
and
life
I knew with
looked
absolute
untouchable,
clarity that Jesus had done this,
protected,
not to prove
blessed
himself,
by God
not to
and
punish them,
bloodline.
but because he said
But
my story
inside
was
those
not finished.
walls, I learned
That
very
truth
early
settled deeper than pain.
that love was
I was
conditional
taken away quickly,
and safety
hidden,
depended
voices
on
arguing in
obedience.
hushed urgency. No one met my eyes.
Islam was
No
not
one
a
spoke my
religion
name.
I chose.
I was a problem now,
It was the
a living
air
contradiction.
I was forced to breathe.
In the hours that followed,
The
as my wounds
language
were
of
examined and
fear that
disbelief turned to
shaped my
dread,
childhood.
I lay silently, replaying the light, the voice, the command to return. Questions burned inside me. Why me? Why now? Why spare me when others were erased? I felt no pride in survival, only responsibility. Fear returned, heavy and real, because living meant consequences death would have spared me. But beneath the fear was peace, steady and unshaken. I understood then that resurrection is not just about breath returning to lungs. It is about purpose being restored where it was meant to be destroyed. They could not explain what had happened. Neither could I, not in their language. All I knew was that I had crossed death's boundary and come back carrying something that could not be taken from me. As night fell and whispers filled the walls around me, I stared into the dark and asked the question that haunted me most. Why was I spared when others were silenced? The answer did not come in words. It came in the quiet certainty that my life was no longer my own. Surviving did not mean I was free. It meant I was dangerous to everyone who wanted the story to end. I was moved quietly, without explanation, passed between hands that avoided eye contact, until the walls around me no longer felt like home, but like containment. I was alive, yet everything that had defined my life was gone in a single morning. My family vanished from my reach. My name became something people whispered with discomfort. And I was not celebrated or protected. I was hidden. Eventually, arrangements were made for my removal, not as rescue, but as risk management. I left my country without ceremony, without farewell, escorted like a secret that needed distance to stay buried. As the land beneath me disappeared, I felt a grief I could not name. I had lost my homeland, my identity, and the illusion that belonging was unconditional. In exile, silence became my companion. Nightmares followed me across borders, replaying the sound of stones, the sensation of falling, the shock of breath returning. I woke gasping, convinced for a moment that I was still buried. Survivor's guilt pressed on my chest like weight. Why had I lived when others had not? Why had my story continued when so many were erased? I carried that question into every quiet hour. I trusted no one. Fear had rewired my instincts. Every sound felt like a threat, every kindness like a test. I moved through days cautiously, a foreigner everywhere, belonging nowhere. Yet in that isolation, something unexpected happened. Jesus met me again, not in visions this time, but in presence that steadied me when panic surged. I found an online church through a cracked screen and a borrowed connection, listening to worship in a language I barely understood, yet felt deeply. When scripture was read, it felt like water touching a long-neglected wound. I learned that healing is slow, that freedom does not arrive all at once. Some days faith felt strong, others it felt like survival. I wrestled with forgiveness, angry at those who had tried to erase me, ashamed of my anger when I read Jesus' words about loving enemies. Slowly, painfully, I learned that forgiveness is not agreement, and it is not weakness. It is release. I began to pray not for safety, but for courage. I asked God to heal what fear had twisted, to teach me how to live without hiding. As my body healed, my soul followed unevenly. I learned to speak again, to laugh without flinching, to trust a few safe voices who knew my story and did not reduce it to spectacle. But the call to speak publicly grew louder, persistent and unsettling. I resisted it.
My name is
felt
Amina,
safer.
and
Obedience
I am
had nearly
32
killed me
years
once.
old.
But every
And
time I read the
everything
words
you
about
think
light
you know
not being
about
hidden,
privilege
my
is a
chest
lie
tightened.
when it is
I
built
knew
on
what truth
fear.
cost, and I was terrified to pay again.
I was born
Still,
into a
I remembered the
Saudi
certainty
royal
I carried back from
household
death,
where
that my
marble
life was no longer
floors
my own.
echoed louder
One
than
evening,
laughter,
preparing to share my
and where
testimony for the
honor
first time,
was valued more
my hands
than
shook
breath
so badly I could barely
itself.
hold the paper. Fear
From the
whispered that
outside,
exposure
my
would bring
life
danger,
looked
that anonymity
untouchable,
was wiser.
protected,
Peace whispered
blessed
otherwise.
by God and
I
bloodline.
realized then that exile had not
But
stripped me of
inside
purpose.
those walls,
It had clarified
I
it.
learned very early
I was not called to comfort.
that love
I was called to witness.
conditional and
As I
safety
spoke, quietly
depended
at
on
first,
obedience.
then with growing steadiness, I felt the weight shift.
Islam was not a
My
religion
pain was no
I
longer
chose.
just mine.
It
It
was
was
the
becoming a
air
doorway
I
for
was
others
forced
still
to
trapped in
breathe.
silence.
The
I did not
language
feel
of
brave.
fear that
I felt
shaped my
obedient.
childhood.
And in that obedience, I felt held again. Speaking publicly did not make the fear disappear. It simply exposed it to the light. Every time I shared my testimony, my body reacted as if danger were imminent. Palms sweating, heart racing, eyes scanning rooms even when I knew I was safe. Threats came quietly at first. Messages filled with warnings, reminders of what happens to women like me. I read them with shaking hands, then closed my eyes and prayed, not for them to stop, but for my courage not to fail. I realized something important in those moments. Following Jesus was not a single dramatic decision I made once. It was a choice I made every day, sometimes every hour. I chose him when fear told me to retreat, when silence promised safety, when obedience felt costly. I began speaking to Muslims who were questioning quietly, their voices low, their eyes full of terror I recognized instantly. I did not argue with them. I did not attack their faith. I simply told them my story and listened to theirs. I told them I understood the fear of losing family, identity, protection. I told them I knew the weight of shame used as a leash. And I told them about Jesus, not as a weapon against Islam, but as the one who met me when fear could not save me. Some listened and left quietly. Some wept. Some told me I was deceived. I learned to release outcomes. Truth does not require force. I also spoke to Christians who had never imagined the cost of discipleship in cultures like mine. I saw shock in their eyes when I described choosing Christ as a death sentence rather than a lifestyle preference. I did not blame them. I simply asked them to pray, to remember, to hold persecuted believers as family rather than distant stories. As I spoke, I noticed something shifting inside me. The pain I carried was no longer just a wound. It was becoming language. It was becoming a bridge. I understood then why my story had continued past death. Not for spectacle, not for proof, but for others who needed to see that truth can survive even the most violent attempts to silence it. I refused to vilify those who opposed me. I spoke honestly about their actions, but I did not deny their humanity. Jesus had not loved me conditionally. I could not love selectively. That was perhaps the hardest lesson. Some days I failed it. Some days anger returned, hot and sharp. On those days I remembered the courtyard, the stones, the moment my breath returned. I remembered that I had been spared not because I was stronger, but because grace intervened. Choosing Jesus every day meant choosing forgiveness when bitterness felt justified. It meant choosing truth when lies felt protective. It meant choosing obedience when comfort was offered as an alternative. There were moments I wanted to disappear again, to be unknown, unthreatening. But peace always followed obedience, even when fear walked beside it. I watched as my testimony reached places I could never go, whispered through phones, shared in secret, passed from one fearful heart to another. Messages arrived from women hiding in bedrooms, from men questioning in silence, from people who thought they were alone until they heard my voice. I realized my pain had become a signal fire. I was no longer just surviving. I was serving. That realization did not remove danger, but it gave it meaning. I understood then that faith is not proven by comfort, but by persistence. That love is not proven by safety, but by sacrifice. Every day I chose Jesus, knowing what it could cost me. And every day he met me with the same quiet faithfulness he had shown me from the beginning. I did not feel heroic.
My name is
I felt
Amina,
human,
and
fragile,
I am 32
dependent,
years old.
and
somehow,
everything you
in that
think
dependence,
you know about
stronger than I had
privilege
ever
is
been.
a lie when it
I
is
was still
built
afraid.
on fear. But fear no longer decided my direction.
I was born
Love
into
did,
a Saudi
and
royal
love had already
household
claimed me.
where marble
Freedom did
floors
not arrive the way I once
echoed
imagined
louder
it
than
would,
laughter,
with applause or
and where
safety,
honor
or
was
the sudden
valued
erasing of
more
fear.
than breath itself.
Freedom came quietly, almost humbly,
From
in
the
moments I did not
outside, my
expect.
life looked
It came when I
untouchable,
realized I no longer flinched at
protected,
every sound,
blessed
when my prayers
by
were no
God
longer
and
driven by
bloodline.
terror, when I could
But
say the name of
inside
Jesus
those
out loud
walls,
without my
I
voice
learned
breaking.
very early
I'm still cautious.
that love was
I'm
conditional.
still aware of the world
and
I came from,
safety
and the
depended
price
on
attached to my
obedience.
faith. But I'm no longer imprisoned
Islam
by
was
it.
not a religion
I have learned
chose.
that freedom is not the
It was
absence
the
of danger.
air I was
It
forced
is the
to
presence
breathe.
of peace that danger
The
cannot steal.
language of fear that
I
shaped
lost my
my
family,
childhood.
my homeland, my former identity, and I grieved those losses deeply. Some nights I still ache for what could have been if truth had not demanded everything. But grief no longer defines me. Christ does. I found a new family, not bound by blood or lineage, but by shared faith and shared courage. People who pray for me by name, who do not see my scars as shame, who do not require my silence to love me. I found a God who does not demand fear to stay close, who does not punish questions, who does not withdraw when I am weak. Jesus met me in death and taught me how to live. I speak now to those who are watching this in secret, whose hearts are pounding because something inside them recognizes truth and is terrified of it. I know that fear. I know the calculations, the risks, the voices, warning you to stay silent. I'm not here to tell you that following Jesus is easy. It is not. It cost me everything. But I'm here to tell you that it is worth everything. Because truth does not destroy you, lies do. Safety built on silence is still a prison. I do not promise you protection. I promise you presence. Jesus does not always remove the fire, but he stands with you in it. My life is proof that even when the world decides your story should end, God can speak a different word. They tried to bury my faith with stones, with shame, with death itself. But Jesus raised me, not just from the ground, but from fear, from lies, from the smallness I was taught to accept. I am not brave on my own. I am faithful because I am held. If you are questioning, seeking, afraid, know this. God sees you. He knows your name. He's not waiting to punish your doubt. He's inviting you to rest. My freedom did not come from escaping danger. It came from surrendering to truth. And truth, when it is Jesus, does not leave you empty. It fills you with a peace that survives loss, exile, and even death. I stand now not as a princess, not as a victim, but as a witness. My story did not end where they thought it would. Yours does not have to either.